The Radio Planet by Ralph Milne Farley, Chapter 10, The Siege of Sur. Miles quickly extracted the bullet from the back of the wounded Veriking. Then tender, furry female hands bore the victim away, as the Earthman stood in thoughtful contemplation of his find. There could be no doubt of it. This was a steel-jacketed bullet, identical with those used in the rifles of the Ant-Men. How came such weapons into the hands of the savage and untrained Roys? It was inconceivable that these uncultured brutes had overwhelmed New Formia and captured the weapons of the Ant-Men. No, the only possible explanation was that the Formians had formed an alliance with the Roys and were either fighting beside them or at least had furnished them with a few firearms to use, of which they had taught. But this last idea was improbable due to the well-known shortage of rifles and ammunition at Urania, capital of the new Ant Empire. No, if the Ant-Men were in alliance with these furry savages, there must be Ant-Men present with the besiegers, and the shot in question must have been fired by the claw of a Formian. This opened up new terrors for the village of Sur and its inhabitants. Miles glanced up apprehensively at the southern sky, half expecting to see and hear the approach of a Formian plane, but the radiant silver expanse was unmarred by any black speck. Sur was safe for the moment. His musings thus contemplated, Miles hurried to the public hall to communicate this discovery to Crota and the village authorities. He found the headman already there in conference with Crota. Said Miles, exhibiting the bullet. Here is one of the magic stones thrown by one of my own magic slingshots, which is capable of shooting from the ground to the top of the cliffs and even penetrating the palisade. It's a big magic. With its aid, the Roys can overcome us. Without it, I am powerless. Therefore, we must secure possession of it. What do you suggest? Crota replied, It is now sunset. Let us select a squad of pick scouts and try to stalk the camp of the enemy. No, no, the headsman of Sur exclaimed in horror. Never have our men dared attack the Roys by dark. Do the Roys know this? Miles asked with interest. Most certainly, was the reply. Then, he said, all the more reason for attempting it. They will be unprepared. The magistrate shrugged his furry shoulders with, If you can persuade any men to attempt something so foolhardy, I would interpose no objection. Within a twelfth of a day, Crota had enrolled 20 scouts, and with Miles Cabot they had all begun the stealthy descent of the narrow, winding path down the face of the cliff. Before starting, they observed the direction of the Roy campfires on one side surrounding hills, so now they crept quietly toward that hill, and then slowly up to its crest. In spite of the dense blackness of the Peruvian night, they were able to find their way, first by starting in a correct direction, and then by keeping the lights of their own village always behind them. As Cabot had expected from the remarks of the headman, there were no sentinels on post, for the enemy were quite evidently relying on the well-known Veriking fear of the unknown terrors in the dark. Indeed, it spoke volumes for the individual courage of the 21 members of this venture, for their confidence in the Earthman leader, that they dared to come at all. Finally, the party emerged on the underbrush at the top of the hill, a few score feet from the tents and campfires of the Roys. There, motioning the others to remain where they were until he gave signal, Miles crawled forward, always in the shadow of some tent, until he was able to peek through a small bush beside one of the tents, directly at the group around the campfires. Just as Cabot arrived at his observation post, a Roy warrior was declaiming, I told you it would work, for I had not seen it demonstrated fully to me. You yourself saw it kill. Now will you not believe me? Another spoke. I cannot understand its principle. How can a weapon kill afar and yet not resemble a sling or a bow? And another, show us how it works, friend, and then perhaps we might be persuaded. And a third, I do not believe he has it. Whereat the original speaker, nettled, spoke again. It's in my tent there, you doubters, indicating the one beside which Cabot crouched. Quick as a flash, Cabot wriggled beneath the back of the tent into its interior. The campfire light, penetrating through the slit opening in the front, revealed nothing but rumpled blankets on the floor and ordinary weapons slung to a tent pole, so the intruder commenced rummaging through the bedding. The conversation outside continued. Prove or be silent, said a voice. You saw the Veriking fall, did you not? The original speaker replied. True, but I did not see you sling a pebble. Meanwhile, Cabot continued his frantic search, and at last it was rewarded. In one corner of the tent, his groping fingers closed upon a Formian rifle and a bandolier of cartridges. A thrill ran through him in the touch. To prove it to you, the voice outside was saying angrily, I will get it for you, and if you are not To believe me, I shall slingshot you with it. That ought to be proof enough even for a stupid person like you. I have said it. The signal for my exit, Miles said to himself as he hastened to crawl out through the back of the tent. But then he reflected. No, I want more than the gun and ammunition. I want information. So he remained. As the Roy entered the tent and felt for his rifle, the crouching Earthman flung himself upon him, and before the startled furry one could utter even a gasp, strong fingers closed about the windpipe, throttling off all sound. The struggle was over in a few moments. When Miles Cabot finally crept out from the enemy tent, it was with a limp from under one arm, and a bandolier and a rifle hung from across his shoulders. The conversation at the campfire continued. One of the warriors was saying, "Our friend takes long to find his wonderful slingshot. Methinks he was lying and does not dare face us." Said another voice, "Let's pull him from the tent and confront him with his perfidy." At this point, Miles sprang to his feet and ran from cover which concealed his followers. "Ran to the cover. Rush in among them as we planned," he urged, "while you two come with me." Then he sped down the hillside toward the lights of Sur with his captive and trophies and two previously picked members of the band, while Crota and the remaining 18 charged, yelling into the midst of the Roy camp, upsetting tents, scattering campfires, and laying about them with their swords. Straight through the camp they charged, shouting, "Make way for At the Terrible!" Then they circled the hill under cover of darkness and rejoined Miles. The startled Roys were taken completely by surprise. From the cries of Crota and his followers, they assumed that the intruders were Roys, partisans of At the Terrible, attacking them for being partisans of Grodd the Silent. As they came rushing out their standing tents or crawled from beneath such tents as had been wrecked, they met others of their own camp, similarly rushing or crawling, and mistaking them for enemies, began to fight. The confusion was complete, and never for a moment did the naked furry savages suspect that the whole trouble had been caused by a mere tiny handful of Kings. Truly, as Poblat the philosopher had said, "While enemies dispute, the realm is at peace." While the Roy followers of Grodd the Silent fought amongst themselves until they gradually discovered there was no one there except themselves, Miles Cabot and his King safely regained the village of Sur with the rifle, the ammunition, and the still unconscious Roy warrior. In the public hall, under tender ministrations of the King maidens, who would far rather have plunged a flint knife into him, the captive finally regained his senses and looked around him in bewilderment. "Where am I?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "In, sir," someone replied. "Then we're victorious, for never has a Roy set foot in Sur." "No, your forces are not victorious," Crota answered. "You are a prisoner, and it is only by the grace of Cabot the Minorian that you are permitted to come here even as a prisoner, for the men of Sur take no prisoners and give no quarter." In reply, Miles himself stepped forward. "I, myself, am Miles Cabot, the Minorian," he said. To which the Crota added impressively, "the greatest magician of two worlds." The prisoner shook his head. "I know of only one world," he asserted, "and this man before me is dressed as a mere common soldier, as are all of you. Know then, O scum of Poros," the Earthman admonished, "that there are other worlds beyond the silver skies, and that in that world from which I come all soldiers are gentlemen." But the Roy warrior was not to be subdued by mere language. "How did I come here?" he asked. "You did not come here," Miles answered. "You were brought. I brought you. But how? By magic." "What magic?" "My magic cart which swims through the air, while reptiles swim through the waters of a lake." "True," the Roy mused. "There do be such aerial wagons, for I have seen them near the city of the beasts of the south." "Mark well," Miles interjected to the assembly of Kings, then to the prisoner again. "I captured you because you possessed the magic slingshot, and presumed to use it on one of my own men. This effrontery could not be permitted to go unpunished, hence your capture. The offending weapon is now mine, and you are my prisoner." "What do you propose to do with me?" the captive asked. "I propose to ask you some questions," Miles evaded. "First, where did you get the magic slingshot?" "The great magician knows everything," the Roy replied with a sneer. "Why then would I presume to tell him anything?" But the Earthman remained unruffled. "You are correct," he countered. "I ask not because I do not already know, but because I wish to test whether it is possible for one of your deranged race to tell truth." "Why test that?" came back the brazen Roy. "For doubtless you know everything, know that too." Miles could not help admiring the insulting calm with which this furry man of inferior race confronted his relentless captor. "Who are you, rash one?" he asked. The prisoner drew himself up proudly with folded arms and answered, "I'm Otto the Bold, son of Grodd the Silent." "Ah," Miles said, "the son of a king, and I am the father of a king. Well, then, as one man to another, tell me where you got your gun. Gun? Otto queried. Is that the name of the weapon of bad omen? Know that when I got it from you yourself, when I wounded you beneath the tree of the brook at the foot of the mountains before the Ver-Kings of Judd, the excuse-maker drove me off. I have spoken. And spoken truly, Cabot replied, concealing his surprise with difficulty. Of course. Why had he not guessed it before? But there was still some more points to clear up, so he continued, Why did you shoot those 2 arrows at me in the house at the top of the mountains? Because we wished to explore the house, but you killed my companion, whereupon I resolved to kill you in revenge, and to capture the noisy gun. Is that the right word? So I trailed after you, and the rest you know. Remember, I know everything, Miles said, grinning. But did you ever see any one but me shoot the gun? You know I never did, was the reply. No one on Poro save Kabat the magician and Otto the bold has ever done this kind of big magic. I saw the results, and not the means, when you killed my companion, so I experimented for myself after I stolen your gun, and soon I learned how, after which I carefully conserved the magic stones until last night when I shot one of the Ver-Kings of Sur, so as to give visible proof of my magic powers to my doubting comrades. The Earthman heaved a sigh of relief. There existed yet no alliance between the Formians and the Roys. Pray heaven that such a calamity would never suggest itself into the minds of either race, for if so, then woe to Verkingia. Son of a king, he said, return to your people and your father. Give him my greetings, and tell him that you are a friend of the great magician who lent you his gun, who transported you through the air within the walls of Sur, where no Roy has ever stood or will ever stand, and who last night caused phantom warriors to attack your camp under the guise of followers of At the Terrible. Go now. My men will give you safe conduct to the plain below. And what is the price of this freedom? Otto disdainfully inquired. The friendship of a king's father for a king's son, Miles Cabot replied with dignity. The two drew themselves up proudly and regarded each other eye to eye for a moment. It is well, Otto the Bold declared. Good-bye, and he departed under the escort of a Ver-King guard. The master knows best, Crota remarked, sadly shaking his head, but I should have run him through the body. The next morning, Cabot thanked the headmen of Sur for their hospitality and took up the return trail for Ver-Kingi, the vacancies in his ranks being filled by the loan of soldiers. The vacancies. I don't know why I couldn't read that. In his ranks being filled by the loan of soldiers from Sur. The party had gone but a short distance when they found the way barred by a formidable body of Roys. But before there came with a bow-shot, a bullet from Cabot's rifle sent 2 of them to the ground, whereupon the rest turned and fled predictably. Later in the day, a bend in the road brought them suddenly upon a furry warrior. Miles fired, and the man instantly fell to the ground. But when they reached the body, there was not even a scratch to be found on it. The bullet had missed. Dead of fright, Miles thought, but no, for the heart was still beating, although faintly, and the lungs were still functioning. Sit up there, Miles ordered. Can't, the Roy replied. I'm dead. Then I'll make you alive again, his captor declared, placing hands on the head of the Roy. Abracadabra kamunga! Thereat, the soldier sat up with a sigh of relief and opened his eyes. Stand up, Miles ordered. For reply, the Roy jumped to his feet and started running for cover. Halt, the Earthman commanded. Halt, or I'll kill you again. The man stopped. Return. The man returned like a sleepwalker. What do you mean by running away? Now listen intently. Are you one of the men of Grodd? Yes. Then go to Otto, son of Grodd, and tell him that it is the order of Cabot the magician that the Ver-King expeditions into these mountains in search of gold cubes and other minerals be unmolested. Tell Otto that he can recognize my expedition by blue flags they will carry hereafter. Now go, I have spoken. The Roy warrior ran up the trail, and this time was not halted. Another mistake, Crota remarked, half to himself. The rest of the return to Ver-Kingi was without event. On the way to the radio man made notes of the best deposits of quartz, limestone, and fluorspar. Also, he carried with him a few large sheets of mica, but he found no traces of galena, zinc ore, or platinum. These would require at least one further expedition. Crota spared no extravagant language in relating to Judd the exploits of Cabot the Menorian in raising the siege of the village of Sur, and Judd repeated the story with embellishments to Theof the Grim. Also, the long-deferred sleight-of-hand performance was held at the palace, to the great mystification of the white-furred king. Arkilu did not show up to mar the occasion. In fact, little Quiven reported that her sister was very indignant at the Earthman for trifling with her affections, and had turned to Judd in her pique. Needless to say, Judd had taken every possible advantage of Kabot's absence to reinstate himself with the chestnut-furred princess, but neither Miles nor Quiven appeared to exhibit any very great sorrow at this turn of events. So long as Erkilu's hostility did not become active, the support of Judd and Theof ought to prove quite sufficient. The standing of Cabot the Minorian as magician was now well established, and accordingly Judd the excuse-maker and even Theof the Grim were willing to accord him all possible assistance in gathering of the materials which he was to perform further magic, namely his radio. Theof made a levy upon the nobles and turned over the Earthman upon 500 soldiers with their proper carts and equipment. Judd himself, Quiven, still unknown to her father, and Crota, the soldier who demonstrated on the expedition an intelligence far above social class, were enrolled as laboratory assistants. Several enclosures adjoining Cabot's yard were vacated and converted into factories. In one, which were mounted a pair of huge millstones, such as the Kings use in grinding certain of their food. Miles divided his men roughly into 3 groups. One group, under Crota, was established at the clay deposits in the northeast of the city to make bricks and charcoal. The second group, under Judd, were encouraged in mining operations, digging copper ore, quartz, rock, fluorspar, limestone, and sand at various points in the mountains, and carting some of the limestone to the brickyard and the rest, with the other products, to Verkingi. The carters carried back with them to the mountains all the necessary supplies for the expeditions. The third group, under Quiven, were engaged in setting up a grist mill, and in other building a preparatory operation. As the clay pits in the first operation was to scrape off the surface clay and spread it thin in the open air, it would age fast. The limestone, upon its arrival at the brickyard, was burned in raw brick ovens and then carted to Verkingi to be ground at the mill. It was then shipped back to the brick plant, where it was mixed with aged clay, first screened, molded into bricks, baked, burned, and carted to Verkingi to be ground into cement. Some of the ground limestone was retained at the Verkingi for use later in glass making, and some of the underground for smelting purposes. Other aged clay was screened, moistened, molded, and baked to form ordinary brick. Fire brick was similarly made by addition of white sand, finely ground at Verkingi, but this kind of brick was to be baked much more slowly. Thus, only a week or 2 after the whole huge industrial undertaking had begun, the radio man was in possession of a fire brick and fire clay with which to start building of smelting furnaces. Meanwhile, Miles Cabot, with a small bodyguard, kept traveling from one job to another, giving general superintendence to the work, and when everything was well under way, he set out on another exploring expedition in search of galena, zinc ore, and platinum. Quiven had furnished the inspiration for this trip by suggesting that the sparkling sands of the large river, which ran west to east, about a day's journey north of Verkingi, might contain the silver grains which he sought. So thither he set out one morning in the camping equipment and a detachment of soldiers. All day they marched northward across the level plains. Toward evening they reached a small estuary of the main stream, and there they camped. As the silver sky pinkened in the west, Miles Cabot ran quickly down to this brook to inspect the sands of the river, which lay but a short distance away. The pink turned to crimson and then purple. The darkness crept out of the east and then plunged the whole face of the planet into velvet and impenetrable black. But Miles Cabot did not return to the camping place.